Been doing the spring clean. This is something where I clear out the boot on the car, go through everything, check what's tools, what's good stuff, what's finished with, and put what we need back. And I noticed that this piece has a lot of holes in it. And I don't remember this piece of plywood, which is the petrol tank sender unit access cover for the intermediary floor. I don't remember it having any holes in it. And the really worrying one is this fresh sawdust. When I picked it up, you can see here there's fresh sawdust on the piece that was underneath it. So we've got some sort of woodworm or beetle or something that is happily munching away at this piece of plywood. Now, I'm not going to put this piece back in the car. I'm going to isolate it so that it doesn't infect anything else. I don't have any treatment, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of research, find out what the best course of action is here. It might be best to end up just replacing this panel, which would be a shame, but if we need to, we need to. Fortunately, the boot is almost entirely steel, the bits you can see. So the panel was up in that top corner. Normally the intermediary floor in here is a big sheet of plywood, but everything else you can see, there's steel between this and the wooden frame of the car. It's no guarantee, obviously, but if they've got an easier source of food, they'll go for the wood that's there, and they probably won't travel further than that if there's a lot of steel in the way. However, where was it? You see here, that's the plywood seat back, and there is a fresh hole there, which suggests that it's got into the car. This isn't good news. This is one of the problems with a wooden framed car I was made aware of, and while we hadn't found any trace of any creepy crawlies, it looks like we've got them now. So I'm going to have to figure out how to address this, and address this quickly, so that we don't end up with the problem getting worse. I suspect I should be able to get away with just treating what I can see here. I might have to redo all of this that I did. Maybe I can do a slightly better job. I'm not happy to discover this, but it's part of the reality of these kinds of cars. This is one of the obstacles, and you don't always know about these sorts of things if the car's all in one piece. So I'm sort of glad it's happened now and not later, when we're actually using the car and the first thing we know about it is, you know, part of the frame suffers. Went and got ourselves some of this woodworm killer. It was just what was in the shop. I don't know anything about this sort of job, so we'll just go with what is easy to get hold of. So it says to put 2 to 3 coats of this on the affected area, and it takes 24 hours to dry fully. It's an insecticide, so it kills the beetle that causes the holes, and it also deters re-infestation. It should cure the problem, and it should mean we don't actually have to replace this panel. We can just treat it and then it should be fine. I'm going to decant it into a jar just to make it a bit easier to apply. And this is fairly dry wood, so it's probably going to soak up quite a bit. Just make sure it gets down into all the little holes. Don't have a syringe for this, and I couldn't actually find one. I have to order something online, so hopefully this will be good enough. Right, I just need to leave that to dry for a little bit before I do the other side. Yeah, I can see it's all disappearing down into the holes here. So that's good. And then when I flip it over and do it the other side, it should soak through all those holes from the other side too. That's all soaked in now. It's not dry, but it is soaked in, so we'll do the second coat, and then I can turn the whole thing over. The first coat I had to apply twice, just to get the surface nicely uniform. The only problem, of course, with it being plywood, as you can see here, it's lifting the laminate slightly. But never mind. Just one of those things. It's all soaked in like it had with the first coat, so let's turn it over and do the other side. It's funny, I do feel slightly guilty doing this. It's not the bug's fault that they're eating it, but needs must. Just the same as the other side, we'll leave all this to dry and come back and give it its second coat. You then need to leave it for 24 hours and then it will be ready to reinstall into the car, all being well. I'm just figuring out here how the rear seat comes out, and it looks like there's some screws under here in this wooden panel which I think holds the bottom of the seat in. So I just have to get those out, which, yeah, I hope they're not going to cause me too much grief. They're flat heads and they go into a captive nut inside the boot if they do hold it in. But before I do that, here in the boot you can see there's some screws up here. I think these hold the top of the seat to the parcel shelf, which is steel. And then down at the bottom, these are those bolts, the captive nuts on the other side. And of course, the reason we're doing this, I peeled the trim back a little bit. I'd seen that hole, there's another one here. So I want to get this board off and treat it, both sides. And I'll reapply this trim, try and get it a bit flatter, which will be easier with it out the car, to be fair. The good thing is there's no sign of woodworm at all in this plywood panel, or this panel. So I think it really is restricted to just that one piece that was in the boot, and then a little bit on the back of the seat here, which is a relief. Now the challenge is just to make sure we isolate it and stop it spreading. So these boards, I will give these a treatment and everything will get sanded. It seems silly not to. They seem to be going after the plywood rather than anything else. And if I put the treatment on, it'll just prevent more of them getting in and munching away. Both prevention and cure, which is exactly what you want, really. It's very difficult for me to show you what I'm filming in here because I'm going to be in the way of the camera and vice versa, so I'm going to fight with all of these, and once I've figured out how it comes out, I'll bring you back. That's the back seat out of the car. It's not as complicated as I was expecting. It's only held in with 6 screws. A little bit easier to show you on the seat itself, which is this piece here. Those wooden strips that I showed you is actually the backing board of this seat, and there's a screw here and here, and then there is a screw that goes in here from the other side, and I think it's that one. So this piece is completely separate. There's no sign of any beetle woodworm type damage on here. I'm happy about that. I will put some treatment on this anyway, just to, keep it as safe as I can. And we're probably the first people to have this off since the car was built. Everything was just seized and horrible. Not at all fun, and these are the original factory marks on there. Same thing is true on the back here. You can see the factory marks up here. I have no idea what they mean, so I can't tell you. And yeah, a lot of the other fixings like these down here just hold this board on. I would like to get this board off just so it's easier to treat. If I had this removed from the car, it's a lot easier to treat, but it does mean disturbing the trim that's glued down here to find some of the screws that hold it all in. And yeah, there's a lot of them, and it's not the nicest thing. But one really good thing up here now is actually installing these is going to be an awful lot easier. You can see sort of how much I need to make a standoff for and that sort of thing. So actually running my wiring is going to be quite a bit easier, because I can just run the wiring down behind this seat and then through there, or I can drill a little hole in the panel here and just drop it down through there and hide it behind the trim in the boot. We'll see. I'm going to have a bit more of a fight with these old flathead screws. It got a bit desperate with the seat. I had to get the vice grips out, and we'll see how far we get with this bit. I've got everything almost there, and the board here is held in place on the top with screws from that side, and then your fabric for your parcel shelf folds over and tacks on this side. So you have to undo all of that. You have to peel back the fabric on here, and that gives you access to these three. One in the top corner there, our fabric was quite loose, so that was easy to get to. And you can see here, this is the back of the captive nut that the screws go into from the other side. These little panels on the side are tacked on, and they ended up coming off as I was lifting this, but that's okay. They could do with a little bit of work, a little bit of tidying up. So I'm going to take that as an opportunity. No signs of woodworm in any of this, which is super. That makes me very happy. At the moment, I am just struggling with one bolt right at the bottom. It would be the very last one. It just does not want to shift. So I'm using the old, crude impact hammer, because my actual impact hammer won't get in there. It's too tight a gap. And penetrating fluid, I haven't used any heat because everything's made of wood and wool felt and cellulose rich Rexine. Heat is not a good idea in here. I'm not going to do that. If I get really desperate, I will break the board. I'll just break that corner off. Again, I don't want to do that. I'm going to persist instead. I'm going to see how far I can get with these tools and just keep plugging away until finally it comes out. Finally got the backing board out, and you can see there's these little felt pads everywhere. These just stop the board rattling against the metal frame. Unfortunately, couldn't get that very last bolt out, so I just chiseled the corner off until the whole thing came out. I'll tidy this up. The amount of fixings in this panel, it's not going to mind not having that one. Done that bit. The battery cover panel there, they're in perfectly good shape. I'm going to sand them back and put some treatment on them anyway, just to make sure everything's good. You can see straight through into the inside of the car now, which is a bit weird. And the only other item that's causing a bit of a struggle is this one here. I'm going to use the angle grinder just to get some heat into it and cut a fresh slot, and that should free it up. If not, I'll grind the top off, and then this panel will come out and I can get that treated as well. This job spiraled a little bit, but it gives us an opportunity to clean out in these spaces that we wouldn't have normally got into. Makes putting the wiring in a bit easier, that sort of thing. The joy of old cars. Unfortunately, had to take an angle grinder to it. The bolt there, the screw thingy, is completely seized in the captive nut, which is spinning in the captive nut housing on the car. So there's no way I could have got that out. So I've chopped the long bit of the stud off, but you've got the little housing here, and inside that is a nut that this goes into, and everything's just seized up. The same thing had happened with this one I couldn't get out. Unfortunately, the angle grinder did jump, so I've got a tiny bit of welding to do there. Not a big deal, we can fix that. I'm going to quickly vacuum all the rubbish out of here and tidy up, and yeah, all this to deal with a little bit of woodworm. Oh well. The good thing is you can see the frame up here, and that's all in great shape. I can't see any holes in it anywhere. It's all painted and I assume treated, so I'm not worrying about that side of things. A little bit of surface rust over there on the interior panels, so I'll probably put some rust converter on that before everything goes back together. But honestly, apart from, you know, goo, it just needs a good vacuum and a good clean, and then we can get everything back together again. In our hunt for more woodworm, I had a little bit of a surprise, but in a good way. All the panels are out of the car now, and there's not really any sign of woodworm getting into anything I've removed, except for 2 little holes in the back panel. That's pretty good. There's no damage on the frame, super. This piece here is the intermediary boot floor for the car, and all up here there's quite a few little holes, because that is where all the activity is, and it looks like they've migrated from here into the loose panel that was in the car. This same plywood, same finish. The only thing is, I completely missed it, because the holes on this side, which is the holes that I could see in the garage, really aren't that obvious. So this could have been happening for a while, and I didn't know. However, now we do know. We can get all this cleaned up. I'm going to sand it back, put some treatment on, and then when all these panels have been treated and have had time to cure, they're all going to get paint on them, because as far as I understand it, the paint, it's not a cure, but it puts one more barrier in the way of the insects getting in, and they don't like it. So anything that's going to keep them at bay is a good idea. This is going to take me a little bit of time. Before I do the treatment, here's a closer look at what we're dealing with. So these little holes here are actually active for the most part, but they're not very obvious. Unless you know what you're looking for, and unless you're checking regularly, you can very easily miss this sort of thing. This side, which was the hidden side, is much more obvious. You can see just how much more active it is, and yeah, it turns out what looks like sawdust there isn't sawdust, that's actually beetle poo, basically. Lovely. So we're going to have to do both sides. I am going to leave pieces like these screwed on sections in place. I don't want to fight with more flathead screws, and the treatment will creep under those sections anyway, so I'm not too worried. Well, that took a while. One thing I've noticed that I'm quite happy about is any panel like these over here that have this black finish on both sides, there's no sign of woodworm at all. This panel, which I had seen some woodworm on the boot side, was untreated. It didn't have this black finish. It had quite a few holes. But the black side doesn't. So that's very good. It's almost like the beetles have gone up to whatever this is, turned around and gone back again. I am glad that I decided to do this job, as big a job as it's been, because these holes here weren't visible at all. These were underneath the glue that was on here. And over here, really, the only holes I'd seen were just two little ones like this. but there's quite a few more that only showed up after I sanded the top layer off everything and it exposed just how many holes there are in here. Now, it does seem like most of the holes are completely dormant, which is good, but I don't know, there's something in that one. Maybe that's a little bug. Yeah, it's kind of sad that I'm going to be committing bug genocide, but needs must. Oh, the penultimate coat. It's taken quite a lot. This plywood has soaked up so much because it's so dry. Except for, you can see the seat back panel there. The black coating is resistant of everything. So I'm guessing it's some kind of protective coating. But I'm in a race against the weather at the moment. There's a storm coming. And yeah, it's slowing the drying time down. I need to get one more coat on before I run out of time today. And then I can put these somewhere safe. So they have the 24 hours they need to cure. I may put a third coat on another day, but I won't have time today. Not the job I wanted to be doing, but the job I ended up having to do. Now that all these boards have been given the treatment, they've dried, they've cured, I've vacuumed them, we've given them plenty of inspection to make sure there's no signs of any bugs coming through, and they seem to be good. We seem to have done the job. Now it's time to get these holes all filled up, to put some strength back in the panels, and then we'll be putting some top coat on to seal everything up. Not really to make it look nice, but more just to keep the bugs out. To make my life easier, I'm going to use some ready mixed wood filler and a little scraper, and we'll go through, find where all these holes are, and you'll very quickly see just how advanced the infestation had got and how localized it was. This one is our worst panel. All you do is just squidge it down. You want to try and get it in as deeply as you can in these little wormholes. When the filler starts to dry out, I scrape it off onto the lid. You want this to be fairly wet if you're using the ready mix, because then it gets deeper into the holes than when it's actually started to cure like this. Once you're satisfied that you have all the holes filled in that you can find, set this aside to dry, and then we'll sand that off afterwards. I'll go through and do the rest of these boards and bring you back when we're ready for sanding. There are some issues with working outdoors in February. The weather is very changeable. Hopefully it'll hold off long enough. I'm keeping a very close eye on the weather as I do this. I did have to bring everything in because it did rain, but it's cleared up a bit. So we'll chance it again. Some of these boards had no woodworm in them at all. The two panels under the seat are pretty good. There was only one hole here, but I'm not entirely sure that's a woodworm hole. Some of the panels have some historic damage here. This looks like it's been attacked by a screwdriver for some reason. So usually woodworm holes are very clean and very neat, which sets them apart from things like those what look like screwdriver punches or nail holes, which can look a little bit messy around the edges. on here you can see just about where the little holes are there. I'm going to sand all of this back and then you'll see where the damage is. The other side of these panels was much worse. This is the good side of them, if you like. It shouldn't take too long. Since I've already sanded these panels down, I'm just using 100 grit on these, and it's just to take back where the filler is. With all of that sanded back, you can see all the little holes in here are now filled. The next job will be to give this all a paint. I do have to paint this outdoors, so I am a little bit at the mercy of the weather. I'm not sure I can chance it today, but we've got some blue skies coming, so maybe I'll have enough time. I was so pleased with this product when I used it on the garage. If you go back through the playlist, you'll see when I did the garage door. I'll put a link in if I remember. I thought it'd be a good choice for this. This is a satin black rather than a gloss or a matte, so it should be nice and durable and close-ish to how things originally looked. Not sponsored or anything, I just like this stuff. And through the magic of doing one side already, this is the back of the panels that I hadn't showed you yet. 2 coats, and yeah, you can see as well why the weather's causing me some problems here. The goal isn't to make a mirror finish or a show quality job here, it's just to make everything tidy. And on these panels, you can't really see that there was any damage, which is just what we want. Now remember, this panel here, which is the intermediary boot floor, wasn't in the car, and that seems to be where the Woodworm started. And this little panel, which is the fuel tank sender access panel, was in the car, and that's where the worst of the Woodworm was, inside the car. It's possible there was some dormant eggs or something in this woodwork before we did any of this. I don't know. Important thing is it's treated now. Seat back panel, I can put that fabric trim piece back on, which will be a lot easier with this out of the car. And the other job I did was I put a strap back on the battery access panel. So this one, you turn your little latch there, and then you pull that out, and that allows you to get to your battery, which lives under the back seat, so you can disconnect it or top up your electrolyte or whatever you need to do. The thing I used for this was some canvas left over from the canvas barrel bag project. Again, pop in the playlist, there is a video all about that. I might replace this with some leather later. It was leather originally, it had rotted away, but this will do very nicely for now, and it's under the seat, so it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It just means that's now properly usable. Once I've painted the other side of all of this, another job I need to do in some places is fit some felt, which just stops panels rattling, helps them fit better, and gives a bit of soundproofing. And it's missing on some of these parts, just age, just degraded and fallen off. So let's pretend I've done that on the other side, and that's this job now done. It's been a big one, but it's also been an important one.